My teacher of New Testament used to tell me, how do you know that the New Testament was made up? The way you know? Because Bethsaida. How could the place where almost all the main apostles came from, all the major miracles of the New Testament, walking on the water happened here, feeding the multitudes happened here. These are major miracles of the entire New Testament, and nobody can find it. And believe me, everybody was looking for it.
If you are interested in historical Jesus, the only place that you can actually go and look at it is Bethsaida. Out of all the places that Jesus was active in Galilee, most scholars are in consensus that he visited only 4 places. And this is Nazareth, Capernaum, Chorazin, and Bethsaida. All the other places, most scholars do not agree that he was actually there. But this is a consensus that all these 4 places were visited by Jesus. Now, what is our availability to see these sites in the 1st century? The only place that we can go and see the site and can excavate it that is associated directly with the ministry of Jesus is Bethsaida.
Bethsaida, the site we're looking at, was so well known by the 4th and 5th century that Christian writers were saying that 6, almost half of the apostles came from the city of Bethsaida. Now, you have to try to put that in context. You know, if you had half the lawyers in America coming from Chicago, you would want to know what they drank, what they ate, what they did, what they saw. If a revolutionary movement comes out of a little place like this, you want to know what was their life like. By the way, not the small apostles, the big apostles. You know, we got Philip and Andrew, and we got Peter, and we got James and John, sons of Zebedee. And you have a variety of those apostles all gathering at one single space. And the big caveat to the whole thing was, it's all written in the New Testament, Christian writings. Nobody could find it. For us in 1987 to say we have found Bethsaida and it's not where you think it's located, we had a big problem. To my back here is the Sea of Galilee. Beit Saida means house of the fishermen. It's very far for them to drag the boats every day to work 2 miles. The water is 2 miles away. So we had a theory, and this is where archaeological technique comes in. The theory was very simple, that perhaps the Sea of Galilee was in fact larger in antiquity. But when you do that, you have to work with geologists, geographers, and you have to work against people who say, well, how come I didn't notice that? So we spent the first 2 years of our excavation with geological research. We dug trenches down to the Sea of Galilee, and conclusively, with the geologists, concluded that a series of earthquakes that occur in this area took this beautiful skyline along the Jordan River that has very steep cliffs. The rocks came into the Jordan River, which is not the Mississippi, dammed it up, and when the dam broke, what happened? Each time after these events, it built up the coastline. Therein, we were able to explain why nobody found Bethsaida for 1,500 years. All the Byzantines were looking for it, couldn't find it, but they were looking for it on the Sea of Galilee, the present Sea of Galilee. And our theory was, no, this despondent, abandoned mound, this was Bethsaida. So it only took us 20 years of excavating, but when you find on top anchors for large fishing boats, each one of the anchors weighs 50 pounds. You know they're not dragging that 2 miles in order to get to the water. That's basically sealed it. And we are really one of the few sacred sites rediscovered based on geological theories.
After several years of drought, the water level of the Sea of Galilee had reached the lowest level in modern recorded history. And in 1986, two brothers, Moshe and Yuval Lufan, were just exploring the shoreline, and they came across what they noticed looked like ancient nails, and they found one after another, and pretty soon they realized there was a faint outline of an ancient ship. They called in experts, and an excavation got underway, and what was recovered was a turn of the era, either 1st century BC or early 1st century AD boat that was about 17 feet long or so and about 7.5 feet wide. Most of it was recovered thanks to the work of Shelley Waxman and Orna Cohen, Kurt Rave, Richard Steffi, and a whole host of volunteers who very carefully excavated this boat, keeping it wet. It was essential that it not dry out, because this wood had somehow survived in this mud for 2,000 years, and it was what we call an anoxic, or an oxygen-free environment. So the bacteria that normally would destroy wood and just simply eat it all up was not present. The excavators described the wood as like soggy cardboard. It was that soft. They had to be very careful sucking the water out of the wood, replacing it with a type of paraffin or wax. Now, the interesting thing about this boat is it's just large enough to accommodate a dozen men or so. So a boat this size would, in fact, be large enough to ferry Jesus and his 12 disciples across the lake. Anyway, no one thinks that this particular boat has a connection to Jesus. It probably had been abandoned and retired, probably already sunk in the mud by the time Jesus' ministry got underway in the late 20s of the 1st century. But the boat does give us an example of what the boats in the time of Jesus would have looked like, both in size, style, design, make, and so forth.
Ancient traditions held that the angel Gabriel appeared to Mary at a well in Nazareth to announce the birth of Jesus. A newly discovered 4th century mosaic now stands as the oldest evidence of this tradition. After unearthing the mosaic, water is poured on the floor, and the mosaic is washed and cleaned to reveal its vibrant original colors.
Okay, so it's going to be like 2-minute window now, where the colors are going to be bright and then they're going to fade. So get it now.
The symbols and the artifacts found with this mosaic provide archaeologists with the best evidence of the tradition of one of the ground zero locations for the beginnings of Christianity in Nazareth.
It's a new history here, no? You heard about it, you know, and now this is, you have the proof. So
You have the proof.
Josephus, the Jewish historian who survived the Great War, 66 to 70, and then wrote about it in a work called Jewish Wars and another work called Jewish Antiquities, tells us that in the precincts that surrounded the sanctuary, the temple precincts, were stones that had carved in Greek warnings that people who were not Jewish not get any closer to the sanctuary. Priests, of course, could get very close. The high priest could actually enter the Holy of Holies when it was appropriate. But otherwise, it was Jewish men who could get the closest, then Jewish women, and then furthest away would be Gentile people. Well, we actually found 2 of them in the ruins surrounding the Temple Mount. One of these inscriptions, part of it, is actually in the Israel Museum in Jerusalem. We actually have the entire inscription, which says that no Gentile or no person of foreign birth may go any closer, move past this barrier. If he does, then he's responsible for his own death, his own thanatos, which will immediately follow. So they were pretty serious about that. And it reflects the political and religious reality of the time. Rome had the power of life and death with one exception, and that is the Jewish people, under the leadership of their priest, they could put someone to death in the temple precincts anyone who violated the warning that's inscribed on this stone.
When you use a word like Beida, that word bait already indicates to you an industry. Like when we say Beit Lechem, Beth Lehem, Lechem means bread, but Beit means an industrial size. So this was an industrial size fishing village. It meant that, for example, when we find the nets on the site, we find nets with net weights. By the way, we found them all laid out exactly because they have to dry the nets every evening. And there was probably some kind of catastrophic moment where they just had to get up and leave, and they just left their stuff. That is what we call good destruction. Good destruction. Because they left everything in situ, in its original location. The food was still inside the ovens. The nets were still being laid out. And on those nets, they had net weights. And we have a series of net weights all laid out. Because these people weren't going out with a hook and line in order to fish. These were commercial fishermen. So this is a lead weight. We found about 500 of these. What's so good about them is this is what commercial fishing is all about. They need nets that they can throw out onto the water, and they clip these things on to the edge of the nets and throw the nets out, and they bring in their catch. And these net weights were made out of lead, and they were very, very important to commercial fishing. You know, people have a sense that the early Christians were a bunch of country bumpkins, didn't know very much about religion, and that they were not necessarily the most educated, and they were poor, very poor. Fact is, what we've learned from this is, number one, they were not poor. They were middle class and upper middle class. We found beautiful gold earrings that are found only in Rome here at the site. We found a private wine cellar. And by the way, it had shipped in Rhodian wine from Rhodes, from the island of Rhodes. So these people knew how to live right. They lived a simple life. They were out here in the village, but they had clean air, they had clean water. This was a good place to live. So the evidence tells us about a different group of people who lived here.
Now, the name of this location, most scholars are convinced, is Magdala, which is Aramaic meaning the tower, or Ha-Migdal in Hebrew meaning the same thing. Now, what's interesting is Mary Magdalene probably came from this very village right here on the shore of the Sea of Galilee. And so there's a good chance that in this synagogue right here behind me, Jesus of Nazareth actually preached on at least one occasion. Now, there's more to it. To my left, about 100 meters or so, a series of mikvaot, ritual immersion pools, were uncovered as well. But one of the most unusual discoveries inside, right in the middle of the floor, or just about the middle, in this synagogue, was a decorated stone. All four sides of the stone decorated, and the top. And then the stone itself slopes. And this has led some to think that perhaps it was a reading stand where the scrolls of Scripture could be unrolled and then read or studied. The emblems that are on the stone depict temple themes and motifs. So we have, for example, the menorah. These temple themes makes us believe that these Galileans at Magdala attending this synagogue were very much focused on the temple in Jerusalem in the south. And so the idea that the Galileans had their own ideas of Jewish faith and they were somehow disconnected or disinterested in Jerusalem, I think needs to be rethought. Now here's where it really gets interesting. People thought that that was very unusual. Wow, that's a one-off. This stone, will never see another one like it. The very next year, another one was found just like it. And it was in a 4th century synagogue, just a few miles from where we are right here at Magdala. And this stone was embedded in the wall as a decoration piece. It's a 1st century stone, but reused in a 4th century synagogue. This tells me that there probably were several synagogues with stones like these. And these stones send a message. They say we are loyal to the temple in Jerusalem. And so that gives us a very interesting new insight into the religious complexities in Galilee in the time of Jesus.
The one thing that we don't find here, which is good, okay, this is good, this is what makes it authentic. We don't find a synagogue, and we don't find a mikveh, a ritual bath. Now, why is that so important? You would say, if it's a Jewish town, they have to have a synagogue and they have to have a mikveh. Not necessarily. The earliest history of synagogues appear to be institutions built outside of the country for those people who don't live close enough to the land of Israel to make their pilgrimage to the temple in Jerusalem. Everybody's supposed to make their temple in Jerusalem pilgrimage. So what are you supposed to do in between? Did people pray? Yes. Where did they pray? They prayed in house synagogues. It's not something that they had an edifice complex, that they had to have a synagogue. Synagogues became important, I think, after the destruction of the Temple of Jerusalem, where you had to have a specific location that looked very similar to the regal dignity of what the temple had been. But in the meantime, people prayed. Where did they pray? They prayed among their own families in house synagogues. By the way, you have the same thing in early Christianity, in house churches. When you have the Jordan River at the bottom of the mound, you don't need a mikveh. We assume that this type of Jewish settlement was at the beginning, before there was regular synagogues and regular ritual baths being used in all Jewish settlements. And that's why it's important.
Herod the Great became king of the Jews in 37 BC. And one of the things that he initiated in his early years as the new king of the Jews was a massive building program. He rebuilt the temple in Jerusalem. He expanded the Temple Mount, added all kinds of buildings. He built a fortress on top of a natural hill west of here at a place that became known as the Herodium. He built also probably the most famous fortress right here where we are. We're at Masada. To the east, over my left shoulder, is the Dead Sea. To the right is the Judean desert. What you're looking at is a flat top promontory that just rises up out of the bed where the Dead Sea at one time was. During the rebellion that broke out in 66 AD, some of the rebels, more than 900 in all, including women and children, came to Masada. Men from Arbel sneaked up the side where the Romans didn't guard it, overtook the guard, allowed everyone to come in, and this fortress then fell into the hands of the rebels and remained in the hands of the rebels even after the main rebellion was put down in the year 70. Well, Rome could hardly celebrate their victory if this piece of real estate, strategic piece of real estate, was still in Jewish hands. And so General Silva marched here in the year 73, surrounded it with Roman squares, camps for his troops. And these squares, made of stone, are still present today. And then out of slave labor built a ramp where he was able then to assault the main gate, burn it, and enter this very compound. And Josephus tells the story, and he says, according to him, that everyone but two committed suicide, and the Romans were astounded when they saw it. Behind me is the Dead Sea. This is the lowest body of water on Earth. It's 1,300 feet below sea level. And also it's along the seam that's called the rift, where two tectonic plates rub against each other, and it's the lowest place on Earth. This goes all the way south to East Africa itself. Now, the Dead Sea is known for its saltiness. In fact, about 1/3 of its content is salt, magnesium, and other minerals and chemicals. It is so dense, so thick with salt and these chemicals, you actually can't sink in it. According to Josephus, Titus and Vespasian and the Romans were told about the buoyancy of the Dead Sea. And so the Romans wanted to put this to a test, and one of the soldiers, who apparently couldn't swim, was actually thrown into the Dead Sea. And everyone laughed. I'm sure they thought it was funny. I doubt if he did. But he didn't sink. He floated. And they were just amazed, and they didn't understand fully the chemistry of this water, why it's that way. So this was the region that was probably the most desert-like region in all of Israel.
One of the subjects that's of greatest interest to me is the Great Revolt. This site was destroyed by the 10th Roman Legion in 69. There's a cave just about 30 meters from us that was an olive press cave from the 1st century. So Craig, we found this cavern that we're sitting in the last day of the dig in 2013. Lo and behold, when I looked in, I saw this large cavern. Now it was filled, where I'm standing, the debris was all the way to the top, and then it arched down, and then it filled all the cavern to about 2 meters. And as we came down here, we began to come across clear human remains. Most of them were disarticulated from the heavy tumble that had, fallen in over time and crushed the skeletal remains. But we saw skulls and femurs, so we tried to be as careful as we could, but they were, pretty disarticulated. We assembled, got all the bones, tried to bag them by what we thought was, with each person. Jesus had warned them of this coming war, this disaster upon their culture. And here we see at Khirbet el-Maqadir a microcosm of what happened in Jerusalem. In fact, from here, they went to Jerusalem. So we see the ashy destruction here, the 8 human skeletons, the 1st century remains are just a stark reminder. As I was excavating this, I was just rolling through the Olivet Discourse in my mind and hearing the words of Jesus, seeing in the material culture the fulfillment of that. I think it's a stark reminder to us of the final prophecy of Jesus.